Jesus of Nazareth was a Jewish man whose story we tell in reverse. We tell his life story through the lens of his death. So after his death, we recreated. His whole life was recreated. So people could understand what was important about both the man and the message. So there are magical birth stories, and there's a story about his moving into adulthood. But for the most part, the story begins when he's 30. Whether he'd been married or if there had been children is never mentioned. We essentially know nothing about his life before that point. At 30 is when the story really begins. Jesus makes a decision to follow his cousin, John the Baptist. John was a desert prophet. We actually talked about John. If you remember, we talked about the visitation during Advent. So Jesus and John are cousins and also good friends and have known each other since birth. And Jesus makes this choice. He makes a choice to follow his cousin John. John is this desert prophet. He's been baptizing people in the river Jordan. People were coming to him to seek guidance, repentance, clarity. John was howling in the river, telling soldiers to stop falsely accusing people and telling those who have more than they need to share with those who need more. His message was sharp and clear, and people wanted to hear it. They wanted to repent. They wanted to live differently, and they came to him in droves, and he blessed them in the river and told them to go and live differently. Jesus had a choice of many spiritual paths. The one he chose to follow was John's. He found his cousin at the river, and he repented his own life as others had before him. After John baptizes Jesus in the river, Jesus takes himself on retreat. He's had a spiritual experience. He wants to process it. He wants to get away from people, to think, to pray. He goes into the desert, which is vast and common in that area of the world. And the story is that he doesn't eat or drink for 40 days, although it's likely he had some bread and water to sustain him. Nonetheless, he enters a period of simplicity for his body so he can get quiet and focus. Again, we don't know anything about his life before that, so we don't know if he was processing grief or was frustrated or angry or otherwise feeling a need for something new. What we do know is that when he left the desert, he was feeling much more clear about the next stage of his life. He knew what he was called to do, knew that the world could be a better place, and that he could help inspire even to love people into a new world. He left the desert to start his ministry, gathering people to preach his vision of transformative generosity and kindness, of healing and community. This is the framework for Lent. First formalized 325 in the year 325, although it was practiced really by Christians long before that. But in 325 at the Council of Nicaea, they formalized this 40-ish days of reflection and built it into Christian culture for nearly the last 2,000 years. Historically, it's taken different forms, but the general idea of fasting and reflection was baked into the tradition a long time ago. And Christians aren't the only ones to experience the benefit of this kind of spiritual practice. Nearly every religious tradition sets aside time for people to pull away from the daily routines for some internal spiritual work. So I'm putting this in the Christian context, but the practice itself is eternal. It is human. It is part of the spiritual impulse. Lent, the Christian practice, started on Wednesday, and we don't have a shared practice of Lent. which I actually kind of think is a shame. This 40 days of reflection, I think, is good for the soul. And as an annual practice, it can be life-changing. You don't like sacrifice. We generally feel very good about ourselves, which often leads to the mistaken impression that we don't need a lot of spiritual healing or course readjustment. We're missing out. We might know we're all saved, we're all loved, but that doesn't mean we're perfect. It means we're loved despite our brokenness. Our theology speaks more to a nature of the universe than our particular situation. We know there's no place on earth or anywhere else that love doesn't exist. We can't get away from it, and in the fullness of our humanity, we are worthy of the love that infuses and surrounds us. All that doesn't mean we don't need to reflect and repent. We've been looking carefully at our liturgical year, and I think being more intentional about a Lenten practice could be good for us. Or maybe it'll be good for me, and I'm hoping you have a similar need. I get more out of these practices when others are doing it. The communal part helps me, both for the sake of accountability and the comfort of community. I feel connected, tethered, seen. I'm often jealous of religious communities that have these practices as part of their communal rhythms and have loved when I was part of them. During Ramadan, for instance, people don't eat when the sun is up, which means if you live in a Muslim country or even just a neighborhood, people are all experiencing the same thing during the day, and in the evening they share meals together in solidarity. So I'm inviting you to join me in a simple experience of Lent each year starting now. Obviously, this is not embedded in our theology in the same way it is for others, and you're free to skip it. But if you're so inclined, if maybe you're feeling a need for a deepening of your spiritual practices, you'll join me. Every Sunday in Lent, the 6 weeks before Easter, we will engage that practice that we did earlier. We'll use that hymn and reflect on our lives just a little bit together. And we've created a practice you can also engage at home, which includes that song. In addition to the practice we started this morning, you might want to bring the whole thing home. So not just on Sundays, but during the week. I'm suggesting that we together lean into this practice, lean into the simplicity of the season. Lent, aligning with that framework of Jesus' 40 days in the desert, is an invitation to simplicity, to clearing away all the extras in our lives that fill our heads and our bodies with distraction. Monks and other ascetics in many global traditions walk away from society for a time or for their whole lives to live simply and see if they can find truth. In our own Unitarian history, we see people like Henry David Thoreau leaving the excesses of 19th century Boston for the rustic life at Walden Pond, so he can, and I'm quoting him, live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. During the Jewish New Year, I always suggest we take some kind of moral inventory, but it's usually a practice we engage for a day or two. This year, and I'm hoping for years to come, I'm going to suggest instead we use these 40 days to live simply, to engage self-reflection, to deepen spiritual connections. Many Christians give something up for Lent. I have spent much of my life feeling superior to them. And it's really because I felt like, well, I understand, the deep spiritual practice and the irrelevance and the shallowness of giving something up. As I get older and maybe more humble, I actually see the power in that practice. In the way that Thoreau let go of modern convenience, there's a wisdom in shifting out of the ease of our own lives and to spend a little time with fewer indulgences. And those things can be as common and popular as giving up chocolate, which for some people might just be the jolt they need to move into a more focused spiritual period. And some people are like, no, don't touch the chocolate. What else have you got? Maybe this is a time to eat vegan or vegetarian. Or maybe this is a good time to focus on things that you like. People talk or think about the things about people that you like, instead of maybe thinking or focusing on the things about people you don't like. To stop maybe gossiping, if that's a distraction for you, or to let go of your habit of saying yes when you really want to say no. What would help you to be your best self? How can you practice being the person you want to be? What would you have to give up? The comfort of feeling superior to other people? The escape of daily drinking? Maybe what you need to give up is a resentment that has grown so familiar to you, you have trouble imagining your life without it. In addition to giving something up, we can also add something to our days that might help us focus on spiritual health. A few years ago, my husband added a daily practice of walking several miles every day, regardless of the weather, which has done wonders for his body and his mind. Assuming none of us want to get 20,000 steps into every day, or don't love walking in the pouring rain, we can consider other things. Maybe 10 minutes of silence each morning, or the practice of writing every evening would work for you. I've created a possible practice of self-reflection you can find available online in the weekly email. I think it's been posted to our socials. And it's essentially that practice from this morning. It can be done every day or once a week. The point is to commit to something and stick to it until Easter. Remove a distraction, add something healthy. This is the first year we're doing this. And the practice can be very simple. Perfection is not the goal. This is an invitation to simplicity for the sake of spiritual depth. There is no desert nearby, and our lives aren't set up for us to wander for 40 days. But even if those things were possible, that is not the proposition. The proposition is to put aside 6 weeks to focus a little, to simplify a little, to let go a little, just a little, just a step. Move into our bodies and out of our heads. To practice, not perfect, a shift towards simplicity with the intention of spiritual expansion. Our economic system prevents so many of us from living simple, balanced lives. We're in a system that tells us more is better, that larger, faster, stronger, newer is the way to go, keeping so many of us on hamster wheels running just to stay in place. Our complicated world requires a lot of money, which in turn requires a lot of time, and we find ourselves running from one thing to the next, always late, always tired, forgetting to eat, constantly knowing no matter how much we do, there's always more to be done. This little period of Lent could provide respite. When Henry David Thoreau went to the woods to shake off civilized life, he found deadening. He wrote, "I do believe in simplicity. It is astonishing as well as sad how many trivial affairs even the wisest thinks he must attend to in a day. how singular an affair he thinks he must omit. When the mathematician would solve a difficult problem, he first frees the equation of all encumbrances and reduces it to its simplest terms. So, simplify the problem of life. Distinguish the necessary and the real. Probe the earth to see where your main roots run. Lent gives us a time to reflect, to take stock of cultural shifts, and to ask questions of ourselves about who we want to be and how we want to live. Lent is our time to downshift. Get quiet. Turn down the volume. Release ourselves from other people's expectations. Lent is the time to prioritize our spiritual lives for listening to the wind, sitting still, waiting for whispers from the trees. I'm going to find my main roots, move away from scattered shallowness, take seriously my need for quiet, for reflection, for shifting of my habits so I can be focused and clear. I may not be able to wander in the desert for 40 days, but I can clear the clutter. And maybe if I do, maybe if we do, we will reemerge on Easter Sunday resurrected and preaching a message of transformational love.